Well, hello, friends. My name is Joshua Dubois. And for the next few minutes, we're going to have a conversation about starting over. You know, the issues that we've been discussing this morning and the issues that many of you all work on every single day, individually they're challenging, but when you thread them together, they can feel pretty overwhelming. Our complicated racial past as connected to the living present for so many Americans, unemployment, which leads to poverty, which leads to crime, our broken criminal justice system and immigration system that, again, many of you all are working to fix. Many communities are facing all of these at the very same time. And that can sort of lead to a climate of despair in a lot of places, and a question that a lot of folks have, is it even possible to turn the page, to flip the script, to start over? Well, the folks on this stage would say, yes, it is possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And they're going to share with us some insights, some ideas, and some stories from their own lives that illustrate how we start over. We have joining us Shirley Franklin, the former mayor of Atlanta and the executive chairman of Purpose-Built Communities. We have Glenn Martin, the executive director of Just Leadership. Dr. Bruce Perry, a national expert in trauma and the founder of the ChildTrauma Academy. And Rosie Perez, the activist and philanthropist and actor and Brooklyn's finest as well. Thank you for joining us, Rosie. Now, we're going to talk about your individual stories and work, but just first a level-setting question. What does a healed, whole community even look like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? I don't know if a lot of us have the answer to that, but you know, based on the examples from your own work and from your own lives, what does a started over community look like? Mayor Franklin, maybe we'll start with you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I would say in our work at Purpose-Built Communities, it's a community that is sustainable and healthy economically, where families are able to thrive, where there's social mobility, excellent schools, community assets that support people in need, that's safe, and over a period of time, you see people able to improve their own lives with the help of the broader community.
Yeah. Glenn, what do you think?
I think that it's not rocket science. I think that for every community that's ravaged by crime, mass incarceration, and mass criminalization, there are other communities that lean up against those communities that enjoy all of the things that you mentioned in your question. I live here in New York, and I tend to, when I do run, I run down Fifth Avenue, and if you start in the hood, you hit this point where you look up and you see the Ralph Lauren Polo Mansion, and you're still on Fifth Avenue. The housing stock looks the same, but you're suddenly in a very safe community. That's because safety has little to do with police officers and guard towers and all the things that we invest in communities that are high crime. We seem to mobilize law enforcement immediately after crimes in those communities, whereas other communities have so many other things that are mobilized for them every single day: education, healthcare, employment, access to good wages. Those are the things that keep communities safe. If I told this audience to close their eyes and think about the safest day in their lives, I doubt many people would open their eyes and talk about shotguns and police cruisers. Mm-hmm. And so I would urge us to look closely at what we're doing for other communities and realize that those are some of the things that can help these communities be whole and safe.
So look at the healing that exists in other communities and model from that. Rosie, what does a healed, whole community look like, feel like to you when you think about that?
I'm close to it. Literally.
Yeah.
I think I embody that. And I feel that I don't think that a community that has been injured and been tainted and been struck down by poverty and crime fully heals, right? But that said, there is room for healing, and the healing process can be continued and nurtured and continue to grow. And for me, it all starts with education. I think that's one of our last civil rights issue, is a comprehensive, well-balanced, fair, and challenging education. And that's not the case. He talks about going down Fifth Avenue. If you start at a public school where you starting out, it's crap. You go down by Ralph Lauren, it's amazing. That shouldn't be in the United States of America. We're supposed to be one for all for one. We're supposed to be about equality and the pursuit of happiness. And if you are injured coming out of the gate, when you enter kindergarten or even nursery school, right there you're at a disadvantage. Yeah. And so I think that a healed community is a community that provides excellent education and an education system that provides a community.
Yeah.
In the sense that, Mayor de Blasio has this school initiative of making our schools a community-based school where your parents could come in and get helped on resumes to get a better job. You can go in and get an eye exam. You don't have to go and wait into a crappy Medicaid office, or what have you, or wait till you're really sick and go into the emergency room. You have, psychological advantages inside your school. The children can seek therapy. The family can seek therapy. All of these things, I think that, we can talk about aesthetically how things look, but I would love to talk about a community who is healed internally.
Yeah.
And then that starts the conversation from there.
So it's a process, but internal healing with education at the heart. Bruce, what does a healed whole community feel like?
Well, talk about a tough question. I come at this from a somewhat different perspective because I'm a neuroscientist and I'm a physician, and I work with maltreated children and families that are struggling in all parts of the world. And one of the things that we've come to see over the years in visiting indigenous communities in Australia that are just struggling with terrible poverty and transgenerational racism and overt genocide and then cultural genocide. And we see this in the First Nations people in Canada. We see this in different ways in communities throughout the US. But within all of these different communities, there are these interesting examples of health. Even when there's no money, even when there's no support from government. And the thing that emerges as the powerful principles that emerge are pretty simple. Just like you said, it's really not rocket science. It's about relationships. A community that has relational wealth is able to tolerate stressors and heal from past stress. A community that has relational poverty, no program, no amount of money, no amount of infusion of people from the outside is going to make that happen. So healthy communities have rhythm, healthy communities have relationships, healthy communities have respect. And those three things create a climate of safety where people can meet their potential.
Rhythm, relationships, and respect. I like that. Shirley, back to you for a minute. Now, you all had to do some significant healing work in Atlanta in a community called Eastlake, I believe. Tell us a little bit about what Eastlake was like back in the day before you launched a pretty intensive redevelopment process. Talk to us about Eastlake.
Well, 20 years ago, Eastlake was known as Little Vietnam in Atlanta. I worked for Andrew Young in his administration. It was the one neighborhood I wouldn't go into alone. Police didn't want to go, fire didn't want to go, postal workers didn't want to go. The crime rate was 18 times the national average. The student achievement rate among elementary schools was in the lowest percentiles in the state. It was a community that where people really did not have the kind of relationships, did not have access to first quality education, didn't feel safe in their own homes. 95% of the people who lived in Eastlake were victims of felony. So they were being preyed upon by others. So this was a community that was in complete disrepair. And the community was built around a public housing neighborhood. And our founder got interested in it, actually reading about Rikers Prison and this whole story about that, and started calling around Atlanta, and decided to, Tom Cousins decided to dedicate his philanthropic effort to helping this community to rebuild. And out of that came what we call the Eastlake model, or the purpose-built model, which is built around bringing together leaders across sector, private sector and public sector, heavy influence of local residents in defining what is a healthy community for them. And the tenets of that are having a not-for-profit or a community quarterback that helps to implement the kinds of plans that come out of such work. Focused on education, builds on pretty much everything that's been said. The school, which was underperforming, is now one of the top performing schools in the state and in the city. Started with a school of less than 300 students, now has 1,700. Started 6 weeks old, go all the way to the 11th grade, and we'll graduate our first class next year. A real focus on education excellence for every single child, regardless of their background, regardless of what their needs are, but making sure that every child can succeed. And then you add to that housing, mixed income housing, and community programs.
And at the heart of that was a connection between community leaders and the business community, right? Tell us about
No
Eva
question.
and Tom. How did
Well,
they come
Eva
together?
Davis was, we have three founders. Tom Cousins, who was a philanthropist and a businessman, built his own business. Renee Glover, who was the head of the Housing Authority, who was looking for solutions, and Eva Davis, who was the tenant leader. And the three of them and a small group of people labored to get to know each other over 2 years. I use the word labored as a polite term. Labored and worked to get to know each other so that they would trust each other enough to embark on this community transformation. And Eva Davis was a very, very strong leader at the local level, known across the state for her leadership skills, grassroots leadership skills. And ultimately, she was an appointee on the Housing Authority and an advocate for this transformation, and lived in the transformed community, or the new community, until her death a few years ago.
Wow.
But she says that she was living in hell, these are her words, and that she was now in paradise, that this was a community where everyone had a chance to succeed.
And let's sort of look at hell in paradise, so to speak. I believe we have some photos of Eastlake before this transformation and after, if we want to bring it up. There's some before photos and another. And let's show what Eastlake looks like now.
Wow,
There we go.
awesome.
Joshua, would I just add that, I mean, the physical transformation is such that you would not believe the earlier statistics if you drove through.
Wow.
But the transformation of a community with leaders and respect and collaboration and partnership is really what will sustain it.
Yeah. So go visit Eastlake. Bruce, I want to come to you next, and we're going to keep all of our comments relatively brief so we can make sure to get to everyone. This is a sort of macro level change, but it starts with individuals, right? And you have really looked into the impact of trauma on people's lives, particularly on children, and how that plays into the challenges they face later. And talk to us about why we need to understand trauma to turn around, to start over.
Well, I think it was mentioned earlier that one of the things that's emerging sort of in the neurosciences is an understanding of the power of experience in shaping how your brain organizes. And I think most people kind of know this, but one of the things that we're learning more and more about is how unpredictability, chaos, overt threat, significant exposure to violence changes your stress response system. And now there's a lot to that, but one of the core problems with that is that if you're really, really tuned up and you have this continuous state of sort of fear that you're living with, when you go to school, even if it's a good school, you can't learn very well, because parts of your brain that would normally be open for learning are shut down because your brain's saying, that's not that important right now. What's really important is who's connected to who, what's going on outside there, am I going to get hurt? And so when I said rhythm, the reason I said rhythm is that anybody who feels dysregulated, if you move, if music, rhythmic conversation, relational connection, all these things quiet your stress response system and make you capable of learning. And so,
You're saying that hip hop heals? by the way?
absolutely, I am saying hip hop heals.
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
saying you can learn more lines of text in rhythm than you can if it's straight prose. You know, they would tell me that they'd have these kids. They'd say, "This kid's illiterate. He's got no cognitive issues and blah blah blah, and he can't read." And then I'd start talking with him, and I'd say, "Do you know any music?" And he'd spit out like 25 lines of rhyme, and I go, "There's nothing wrong with this kid's brain.
Yeah.
This kid hasn't been regulated enough. He hasn't been taught the right way."
Absolutely. Rosie, I'd love to come to you next. You know, many folks know your work in Hollywood. I have to say, White Men Can't Jump, one of the best comedies of all time. Can I get some agreement there? But you've also been working, sometimes behind the scenes, helping kids who have endured some really tough times based in your own experiences. You went into the foster care system at 3 years old, and that's really shaped your later work. Tell us about your life growing up and about your work now in arts education.
Well, first of all, the arts education organization that I'm with is Urban Arts Partnership.
Yeah.
And we work only with Title I schools, only public schools. And we service over 100 public schools in New York and over 15,000 kids per year.
Wow.
And part of creating the organization, what was very important to me was that, one, we go to the kids. We go to the problem. We don't make the kids work to get help. The other thing was that no child could ever be kicked out of our organization. It's voluntary, but once you're in there, regardless of your behavior, we don't condone bad behavior, but we don't punish it either, in the sense of kicking a kid out and making them feel worse about themselves. For me, also what was important was understanding the stress factors that a kid from poverty has to deal with. You're inside your home, you probably got beaten last night, or you didn't have a good meal. You can't concentrate, maybe your lights are off. You're by the stove trying to keep warm if your gas and electricity is on. When you wake up in the morning, you probably don't have any food to eat, so you want to hurry up and get to school so you can have a decent meal, but you have an anxiety attack because you're embarrassed that you have the free lunch ticket, and you're embarrassed because you have holes in your shoes, I did, and you're exhausted because you can't afford a MetroCard. So by the time you walk in the door, and maybe if you live in an abusive home, you're sneaking to get to the bathroom so you can avoid maybe your parent or your sibling or whomever's in the house from sexually molesting you. And these are realities. This was my reality. So by the time you walk into school, you're a nervous wreck. You're a nervous wreck, and you're absolutely right. Your main concern is that you do not want to get hurt anymore. And so a teacher will look at you and immediately label you as a problem child. So in Urban Arts Partnership, it was very, very important to me that we create arts ed integrated curriculums that not only help kids comprehend the academics, but also help kids with their psychological issues, with their self-esteem issues, with knowing that they have a safe environment to go to, that people actually care, and also offer programs that teach them in a different way, because every single kid is different. When I was in the foster care system, I was a ward of the state, I was property of the Catholic Church as well. Every time I went to public school, I was labeled, I was ostracized, and it hurt. For someone, a kid who's 5 years old, that's just too much to bear with.
Yeah.
So by the time I was in 3rd grade, I was very angry, and if you looked at me wrong, I'd punch you in the face. I'd be sent to detention time and time and time and time again. So I would fall back on my studies, I would walk back into school thinking that I'm a loser, and from the grace of God, by the grace of God, when I went to a different school, and there was a principal, Mr. Sanchez was his name, I'll never forget him. And he wasn't in the city, he was actually upstate, because that's where the institution was. It was Brinkerhoff. Brinkerhoff. And Mr. Sanchez, they took me to his office, and he asked me what was wrong. And I said, nothing. And he was just silent, and the tears started to come down. He closed his door, he gave me a tissue, he goes, you want to stay here for the rest of the day? I said, sure. And I stayed in the principal's office for the rest of the day. He walked me back to class holding my hand. I felt so special. I felt like somebody cared about me. He took the teacher outside in the hallway, and I heard him reprimanding the teacher.
Wow.
That's what I'm talking about.
And so
And
Rosie,
for the urban arts, I want to finish this
Yeah,
because it's very, very important. We teach kids in different ways. We use hip-hop music. We also use R&B music, and we're going to start using country music too, because we don't want to ostracize anybody
That's
out
right.
of the conversation. you know?
inclusive environment over there, absolutely.
We have a wonderful program called Fresh Prep, right? Fresh Prep breaks down the Regents exam, which is an exam in high school that you have to take in order to graduate from high school. We get kids that have failed that exam 5 to 10 times. I am not lying. They're in public school. You can stay in school until you age out. Literally, there's 20-year-olds who are seniors or juniors or sophomores in our public school systems. They take Fresh Prep. We break it down into hip-hop songs, interactive play games, and word play games. 3-week course, they pass the exam.
Wow.
We have an 85% success rate.
And the beautiful thing is, Rosie, you know, the depth of challenges that you walk through in your life, that turnaround moment with that principle, but also just your own human spirit. Now you're able to pull all of that hurt and pain and let it inform the work that you're doing now with Urban Arts Academy. Thank you so much for that. And let's give her another round of applause. Then we're going to wrap up with you, my friend. There's so many things that define you and so much tremendous work you're doing, but one part of your story is you spent 6 years in the New York State penal system. Talk to us a little bit about that experience and how difficult it was to transition out and how it informs your work today, empowering formerly incarcerated persons as leaders.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You know, when I went to prison, you know, people assume that if you're engaged in criminal activity, then you have a sense of what you're going to experience when you get to prison. And for me, it was a shock. It wasn't a shock because I got there and I met the animals and wolf packs that we tend to talk about on television. It was a shock because I got there and I met some of America's best and brightest. And I was totally taken aback at the hypocrisy of the system and the fact that it was totally devoid of rehabilitative services. And, you know, that's why I really appreciate the Justice Summit and John Jay and Jeremy Travis and Tina, because they have included the leadership of formerly incarcerated people in a way that doesn't feel like trauma porn. I mean, you had Khalil sitting up here. You had Khalil sitting up here earlier, and clearly while he was telling his story, he was not just telling it articulately, but he was telling it very strategically. And that's what we do at Just Leadership USA. We invest in the very people that have the most interest in the outcome of the decarceration work that we're doing at Just Leadership USA. The toughest moment I had today so far was meeting the mother of Khalif Browder back in the green room and sort of getting down on my knees in front of her and thanking her for her courage, but then telling her that our goal is to shutter Rikers Island, to close down the facility, and to decentralize the jail here in New York City. And she immediately asked me 3 or 4 other questions about how that would happen with an extreme amount of interest. And I'm just blown away that her son's story has gotten to the point where our president is using it as part of the wind beneath his wings to push forward reform. And yet no one has told her that that insidious torture island just off LaGuardia Airport in one of the most progressive cities in America abuses our children. We have 10,220 officers and 9,000 people serving time. Where else in this country, where else in this world do you have that? That jail is an economic engine for this community, and when I talked to over 300 formerly incarcerated leaders before building this organization 14 months ago, almost every single one I spoke to pointed to Rikers Island as a symbol of this sort of institution that helped us to create mass incarceration and continues to cause human carnage. And yet the mayor that we have here in New York City has yet to show the political courage to step up and say that we should close that place down.
Friends, I have often said I wish I had more time, but I've never meant it more than right now. My goodness. Tina, could I have 5 more minutes? The key takeaways, as I've heard them, and we could spend another hour on this, Bruce, understand the importance of trauma and give our kids access to the rhythm and relationships they need to stabilize and emerge as whole. Shirley, know that turnarounds like the ones we saw on the screen can happen if you give communities access to their own leadership and connect the business community as well. And you can find out more about what she's doing at Purpose-Built Communities. Glenn, empowering formerly incarcerated persons as leaders, knowing that they're the best and the brightest, and also shut down Rikers Island, right? Thank you. And Rosie, just that passionate personal story that has led to the transformation that she's seeing every day through arts education, but really just starting with the fact that these kids matter, they're individuals, their stories matter, and understanding them, learning to know them and to like them first. Yeah, and wrap us up, Rosie. Here we go.
But I really want to say this. We started our organization, Urban Arts Partnership, around 22 years ago, and I have this model that we have been reiterating to the kids, to sponsors, to adults. What separates a child, an underprivileged child, from a privileged child is opportunity. That's it. You give an underprivileged child an opportunity and they will rise to the occasion each and every time, and we see that every single day. It can happen. We can make that change.
Yeah.
All right.